Welcome to this live version of GoPowercat. I don't know, it's a GPC live. We haven't done one of these in a long time. Usually on Mondays, by the way, it's Fitz and Cole. Usually on Mondays, we have the insiders, and we'll have that tomorrow night because Kansas State men's basketball is at 8. Women's basketball just completed. Are you hearing that?
Mm-mm. Are you must have our link pulled up in another viewer. You want to watch and record at the same time. That's pretty impressive skill right there. For folks who aren't aware, our boss is very multi-talented. I would assume he has the YouTube link pulled up somewhere.
That was weird.
Mm-hmm.
That was weird. Okay, there we go. We're live on YouTube apparently, and no, that was on X actually. That was very strange. Brian Gilbert, who's in Salt Lake City, will join us in a little bit. But let's start with the women, and we'll also get to Luke Wells getting hired by Kansas State football to complete their 2025 coaching staff. But Cole, let's start with the women's game. What was the score, 70-57? That wasn't that close.
No.
They could not handle that West Virginia pressure. Honestly, the game was called perfectly for West Virginia. I'm not blaming this on the officials. That's just a reality when you play a foul and press team, because that's what that is. It's amazing that they found a women's coach that plays just like Hugs did for a while.
I said the exact same thing.
It's crazy. It's like their brand out there, and it works. And if you get the right crew that kind of calls a loose game, advantage you. And it was a big advantage today. And again, I'm not blaming the officials. It's just how the game was called and played, and it didn't work to K-State's advantage.
No, and the officials pretty much stuck with the way that they were calling the game. So, it's really up to K-State to adjust at that point. And it felt like they tried to do some things. Jeff Mittie said before the game that they wanted to have under 20 turnovers, which they said on the broadcast fits that in a game in November, West Virginia turned, they didn't say the team, I'm assuming it was a mid-major. They turned them over 44 times in a single game. I don't know how many basketball possessions there typically are in a game, but I can't imagine that there's much more than that. Pretty impressive stuff from West Virginia. But I looked at the defensive end, and that was really where my disappointment was for K-State today. They tried some different things defensively, and it felt like they were chasing a lot, which led to open threes. It felt like whenever they would get into a zone, they wouldn't collapse on the high post and would give up an easy runner. It felt like anything that they did, West Virginia had an answer for, and there just wasn't a lot of in-game adjustments. And I don't know, maybe if K-State was expecting West Virginia to be that good on offense. The numbers say that they're typically more of a defense-first team, but I thought West Virginia was really, really good today, and K-State was frankly just not.
It reminded me of the Kansas State men's performance from Saturday.
Yeah.
You just weren't yourself. And I can say that about how the women played. They didn't hit enough outside shots, which is kind of the bread and butter. They weren't working it inside very well. That press had them, or pressure defense had them tied up in knots and totally rattled. And then West Virginia got comfortable and they started making shots. So it really did kind of look like that men's game at BYU, where a good opponent on the road just got the better of you. Got to wash it and move on. Although, Cole, you pointed this out, got a little heat. K-State's women have put themselves in a bad position in terms of winning the Big 12 conference.
Yeah, it's one of those things to where if they want to win the Big 12 championship, it's still attainable. However, it's not going to be easy. You look at their schedule the rest of the way, and it's very conceivable that they'd win out. Everything we're hearing, Ioka Lee is going to be back on Saturday when they play Kansas, which would be obviously big time for Jeff Mittie's bunch. But when you start to look at around the league, they now have 3 conference losses. TCU and Baylor both have 2 losses. Utah has 3 losses. West Virginia has 4 losses. So really what you're looking at is TCU to lose one more game in order for you to have a chance to win the Big 12. Now, I tweeted out that it was a pipe dream. Maybe that was a little bit of an overreaction. But TCU hasn't shown that they are prone to losing many games. That's just not something that they've done. You look at their schedule. They had just defeated Arizona. They get Arizona State this week, but they get West Virginia. The only thing about that game, you might think West Virginia have a good chance to win that game with The West Virginia we saw today, that game is in Fort Worth. And so that's going to be really tough for West Virginia to win inside of Fort Worth. We know how much TCU supports their women's basketball, just like K-State does. And really, you're looking at the only other opportunity for a loss would be the last game of the regular season when TCU has to go down to Baylor. That was a game that was really close the first time around. So if you're a K-State fan, you hope that you can take care of business the rest of the season, and then your eyes are probably locked in on that last game of the regular season, which could determine if K-State wins the Big 12 championship or not.
Yep, it could. Not a good day for the women in Morgantown. The men played tonight in Utah in Salt Lake City against the Utes, a winner over Kansas on Saturday. So they're coming off a big win. Utah went 2-0 against the Kansas schools on over the weekend, so that wasn't particularly great for K-State, but who cares about KU, right? And this one's pretty essential for the K-State men. We'll get to that a little bit later in the show. Hopefully, Ryan Gilbert will be able to join us from Salt Lake City. Let's look at some of these stats here for the K-State women who really struggled from the field today. They only shot 39%. Excuse me, let me find it again. Game percentage, 39% from the field, 25% from three. That is not like them at all.
Terran Sides was scoreless.
Terran Sides scoreless, 0 for 4. You look at Sandell with 6 turnovers, Poindexter with 5 turnovers, the team with 21 turnovers. And that's a season high, I believe, for Kansas State. Just a dreadful performance. They just got whooped in every way. Poindexter with 17 points. She was a bright spot on offense when she wasn't turning the ball over. Diana Walker with 12 points as she stepped up. But, the only ones that hit 3-pointers in this entire game were Poindexter and Jalen Glenn. When you're turning the ball over and not shooting it well, Cole, you're going to lose. You're just going to lose.
Yeah,
and they did.
The thing about this team, Fitz, is in the women's game, it's so much different than the men's game. And I'm kind of taking a step back and looking at a bigger picture here because we can sit here and break down the game. It's pretty simple. They didn't make their shots. And the player who won Big 12 Player of the Week in Terran Sides went scoreless. She was just named Big 12 Player of the Week, and she was held scoreless. So I credit West Virginia, JJ Quinterly, like they were outstanding. But the thing about the women's game is you just want to be one of those top 16 teams. That's really what it comes down to. Can you be a top 16 seed and host? And if you can, your odds of making the Sweet 16 go up exponentially. That West Virginia team right now, they're on the 6th line. No team is going to want to go into Morgantown and play that team. That's a team that I don't care who they're playing. If they get a top 16 seed, they will make it to the Sweet 16. You could pencil them in because that's a real home court advantage. But I think it can be said for the same thing for K-State. They maybe can lose one more regular season game and potentially still have a top 16 seed. They're borderline 2 or 3 coming into this game. I think they're probably cemented as a back half 3 seed right now. But you just want to be one of those top 16 seeds because if K-State can do that, then they're going to have a great chance to move on. And it just is all about the matchups. And I don't think there's one single dominant team in the women's game this year. And, from there, you just roll the dice. But again, this was one of those games to where if you win, you put yourself in position not only to win the Big 12, but to potentially move up to a 2 seed. I think that's probably out of the realm of possibility right now. But I still think this team has a lot in front of them.
Well, they don't have a lot of season left. I can tell you that because keep in mind in the new Big 12, the women play their tournament a week earlier. So that's coming up. They expect the return of Ayoka Lee on Saturday when they play Kansas in Bramlage Coliseum. That is slated for a 4 p.m. tip-off. It's on ESPN+. They will go to Baylor the following Monday night and then close up the season, the regular season, on March 2nd, Sunday at Iowa State. So this weekend's game with Kansas is your final home game, barring an NCAA tournament visit or site for Kansas State. So they need to win out, Cole. They need to find a loss from TCU, but we'll see if that all works out. It's going to be a weird week in K-State sports. There's nothing going on. Well, they got some baseball out there probably, but basketball shut down now for the rest of the week. After the men finish tonight, there is no basketball game until the women play Saturday, and the men don't play till next Sunday.
Right.
Folks, the men play 2 Sundays in a row at Bramlage Coliseum. It's very strange, but that's what happens when the NFL is over. So you've got to wait after tonight all the way till Sunday with Arizona State. The women have Kansas. It's going to be a big weekend of games. Let's turn our attention real quick before we bring in Ryan Gilbert, though, with the hiring of Luke Wells, the brother of Matt Wells, to be the tight ends coach. It's someone that Chris Kleiman had looked at previously before they decided to, just move LePac in and up and now over. It's kind of like Luke Wells is chasing Brian LePac around a career right now. But they moved Brian LePac, the tight ends coach, to the offensive line. That is his position of expertise. That's not just, okay, can you coach the offensive line? This is what he does. And this is what I find interesting about this spot. There aren't a whole lot of actual tight end coaches out there, Cole. I mean, in the college ranks. Right. This is kind of the entry-level, full-time staff member job. You get on a coaching staff and you're on the offensive side of the ball, there's a good chance you're going to be coaching tight ends. You might get some fullbacks, but you're going to coach the tight ends. It's kind of the safe one, you can't screw this up too bad.
Right.
Brian LePac certainly didn't. K-State's tight ends turned into something marvelous. But Luke Wells is a tight end coach by trade. This is his area of expertise. I like that hire for that reason. He was the recruiting coordinator at Utah State when he and his brother's head coach. They had a really good team out there. They kind of ran out of gas at Texas Tech. You can talk about that dismissal and how ironically Chris Kleiman did him in. But then he went to Tulsa for a year, and this last past season, he coached his son at Bixby High School in Oklahoma. So he brings some Oklahoma ties. I like this hire. I really do, because he'll walk into that coach's room and be one of them. He just will. There'll be no tension, nothing to sort back out. And I think the staff doesn't miss a beat, despite losing your offensive coordinator / offensive line coach in the offseason.
There is a lot of folks who, when this first surfaced, were maybe a little perplexed, maybe not perplexed, but kind of frustrated with the hire. And Fitz, I totally agree with everything you just said. And I'm going to go a step further. I think that the tight end coach position is one of those positions to where a lot of the times you have guys who will move in and out of that position very quickly, right? You're a tight ends coach. If you do good, guess what? You want to move up to go be an offensive line coach. You want to move up to go be a running backs coach. After that, you want to be an offensive coordinator. And so the fact that K-State's actually had so much continuity on their staff is pretty remarkable given the success that they've had. Yeah. But if you don't think that the tight ends coach, if you think the tight ends coach is an extremely valued offensive position coach, I encourage you to go back and look at the staff changes Chris Kleiman made with Jason Ray and Courtney Messingham. If you remember that, those two guys flip-flopped. One was the wide receivers coach and one was the tight ends coach. Well, before those guys were actually dismissed, they flip-flopped positions. And obviously the next year they would be dismissed in case they would bring in Brian LePac and Matthew Middleton. I think that the hiring of Luke Wells signifies that K-State's very comfortable with the hire. They feel like they have a guy who's going to be loyal, who's going to stick around. There's probably not a lot of willingness to go interview for other jobs. He's going to be there as long as his brother's there. And if they're having success, then nobody's going to even remember this hire in a year and a half, because he's just going to be another coach standing on the sidelines helping his position group.
Yeah, the only way people will notice this hire is if the tight ends fall off. They really will. I mean, it's kind of like special teams. If the special teams at Kansas State falls off, the fans notice. Tight ends now, after what we've seen the last, 3-4 seasons, if it falls off, people will know. People will say something. So LePac's done a great job. He turned Ben Sennett into something special. The second-round pick in the NFL. He's developed all those guys that played this year. He's got more coming up. He's got Lincoln Cure arriving, and turning it over to a proven coach at that position, I think really helps, and probably doesn't disrupt you much with Ian Primer either out of Great Bend, another incredible tight end out of the state of Kansas that K-State wants. So I think this was a really safe hire, but also a wise hire. You don't want to mess up the recipe. If you think you've got a really stable coaching staff and you're losing a guy, you're already going to have a new play caller, the third different one in 3 seasons. So keep this pretty simple. And we know this, he'll be on the same page as his own brother because they've coached together most of their lives and been together. So I like it. We'll see where this brings us. And, the big question though was how long does Chris Kleiman go? I mean, I think he's not long for this coaching world, unless the upcoming changes to the rev sharing and the changes to the NIL and maybe some tweaks to the portal calm all this nonsense down and make it a little more manageable for coaches. Cole, we're just going to see a washout of some coaches. It just isn't worth it at some point for your health or your marriage or even your career to go through the kind of stress these college coaches go through the start of the season all the way through the end of bowl season and maybe even up to the first Wednesday of February. They have signing day. It's just like a nonstop onslaught of games, recruiting, transfer portal, prep. It's just a mess. It's an impossible combination of things that one person really struggles to do.
It is, and it's a good thing that he's built such a good support system around him. I mean, I think that's part of the reason, if you're going to look at it from the opposite angle, that, hey, he might stick around maybe, longer than some people think, and maybe even longer than he thinks, because he's got such a good support system. And I think going back to this Luke Wells thing too, Fitz, like that is going to be somebody who is going to be part of that support system. They're not just bringing in a young guy who is going to look to try and upgrade immediately. Like, I think that's part of what's made him so successful, is the fact that he's built such a really good staff with guys who are continuously supporting him, having his back, and quite frankly, making his job just a little bit easier.
I would agree. Let's bring in the talking monkey in Utah. Hi, buddy.
What's up, guys? How's it going?
Good. Kansas
We'll
State.
see if I make it back, Fitz. I don't know if this weather's gonna keep me out here or not. We'll see.
You might want to just stay. I think the snow will be okay, but I think on Thursday it's supposed to be as low as -13.
Ugh. I'll just stay here.
It's 20 out right now, but it feels like it's 0, to be honest, because the wind's just howling. It's miserable. But your job is to cover a victory tonight, so don't come home if they lose, because it would all be your fault. How do you feel about this one, Gills? They play at 8:00. Utah coming off the big win. K-State coming off the loss at BYU. Quick turnaround. A lot of moving parts here that make this a very interesting game, but I have a good feeling about this for the Wildcats.
Yeah, I feel good too. And coming into this trip, I didn't necessarily know how to feel about this Utah game, but just after the results of Saturday's games, right? Kansas State, I think, was humbled. Doug McDaniel talked about that game being maybe one that K-State needed, right, to kind of wake up and refocus and understand that, yeah, you're a good team. You've won 6 in a row, but you can't win them all. And maybe that one was just kind of a win to hit the reset button and humble yourself a little bit. And then just looking at Utah, that's their first ranked win of the season. Probably, I know Utah beat BYU, but other than that, that's probably their biggest win of the year, right? So wouldn't be outlandish to label this as a potential letdown game for the Utes. So I feel good just in terms of kind of the intangibles and the off the court factors, but it's not great playing 48 hours later on the road, staying in a hotel, altitude, all that stuff. But I think if you lose, you would much rather just play as quick as you can rather than dwell and wait until, say, Wednesday to play the game. So I think I feel pretty good with Kansas State in terms of the situation with where both teams are kind of at right now.
I would totally agree with you. I think this is a good opportunity. You've now been in Utah for 3 days. If the altitude was a problem at BYU, you're acclimated. You should be. I just think they were flat. I think they were emotionally exhausted from the run. I thought the women looked that way today too, as I said at the top of the show. And I think they'll be better. I do, but if they're not, I think it's an alarm. I think it means maybe the run was the run, and they're kind of going back towards the middle. They won't be as bad as they were, but they're going to settle back towards the median a little bit. But as I said in my daily delivery today, Gills, I think this is pretty important. This one kind of jumps out at you because we still have them needing 5 wins over the next 6 games to probably be on the bubble, maybe in pretty good shape on the bubble. But you lose this one, you got to win out, basically, including 2 road games and closing with Iowa State on senior day in Manhattan. It makes it really tough if you don't win this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talked about this on the Power Talk after the game, that you can really salvage this road trip, and you go 500. That's okay, right? I think you would rather have beaten BYU just in terms of the resume and the strength of that victory. But you go 1-1, right? It's okay. And there's still a lot of winnable games left on the docket. But if you lose this one, your wiggle room is out, right? You have no more you have no more comfortable losses left. But Fitz, you mentioned earlier, K-State was flat, is what you said, right? And shout out to Dr. J on our boards. He pointed out kind of the minutes and some of the other teams in the Big 12 and just the minutes, how many minutes guys are playing. And you're going to need a lot from CJ Jones and Moby in particular. And I would love it if Castillo or Ugo could step up and maybe do more, but I'm not necessarily crossing my fingers, right? But we've seen CJ and Moby have significant roles with this team. And K-State's going to run out of gas at some point, especially if its starters are playing as much as they have, right? So you're going to need some guys off the bench to step up. And, was this sustainable? Like you said, Fitz, like, was that 6 games just a flash in the pan and now K-State's going to start losing? Well, I don't know. I don't know how I would feel about starters playing 35 minutes a night and thinking that you can sustain that. So bench moving forward, I'm not necessarily saying that Moby and CJ have to score 10, 12 points each, but just get on the floor, let David Gasson go sit on the bench for 4 or 5 minutes, and you can weather that storm, right? Coleman Hawkins, whoever's needing, a breather, let them get that, and hopefully K-State doesn't miss a beat with some of those depth guys in there.
It is a scheduling anomaly, though, right now where K-State plays on Monday and not until Sunday. So they're going to get some downtime once they go home. Yeah. Another reason why I think this win is important, because you don't have to sit there and mull over a loss for 6 days before you play again.
And guys, I'm going to jump in here and throw into some factors of this, some kind of the stuff you've already talking about. I've been doing a lot of kind of thinking about this game in particular. And I don't know if you guys had a chance to watch the Utah-Kansas game, but where I was at was on while the K-State game was on. Obviously watched the rest of that game. First of all, I don't think Utah is that good of a basketball team. I know, Fitz, you said we weren't going to talk about KU, but that is a completely different basketball team on the road than they are at home. I think the metrics back that up, and KU looked horrible. I mean, we'll just call it how it is. They looked absolutely horrible, and Utah didn't play particularly well. But you throw in the fact that you just literally beat a team where, we talk about the hangover games. Well, there was probably a little bit of a hangover syndrome on Sunday because Salt Lake City is not Provo. Let's let that be known right now. But you look at the average attendance, and so I just looked this up. The average attendance last year for Utah home games was 7,900. Their arena sits 15,000 people. Okay, there was over 13,000 people at the Kansas game on Saturday. You go back to the game against Colorado, another random weekday game on February 5th that Utah won. There was 7,000 people there. And so I don't think that K-State's walking into the same road environment that they were obviously walking into Provo. And Ryan, you can touch on more of that as well. But, this is the definition of a hangover game for Utah and the definition of a get-right game for K-State. And so when you throw in all those factors and you throw in the factor that I think that K-State's probably more talented than Utah, the only reason that Utah is favored is because they're home. And I just told you that I don't think the home court advantage is going to be much of a thing tonight. I just really, really, really like K-State in this spot.
Yeah, I agree. And Provo, I love Provo. You guys know that. Utah fans are great, but it wasn't sold out. I mean, they listed it as a sellout, but there were empty seats up top. But it was not as loud as I thought it would be, right? Kansas State didn't lose that game at all because of the crowd, right? They were a lot of people there, but it didn't make a real difference. And so, yeah, with Utah, again, I don't think that that's going to be much of a factor. Obviously in the back of your mind, that 15-game road losing streak that this team was able to recently snap, I think that that's still somewhat of a concern, right? But overall, I mean, you've had time to acclimate here. You've been in this area for a couple of days now. It's colder than it, Manhattan's obviously colder than it is here, right? So, I don't know if the road factor means as much in this game as it might usually. So, Cole, I agree with you that K-State, if you can just lock in and play the game, should have a good chance to win. But I know Coleman Hawkins has talked about in the past when the Wildcats beat Iowa State on the road, he loves feeding off of that noise and that energy. Well, you got to create your own energy in this game.
Gills, you're hanging out with the fellas for 3 days. Where'd you guys go to eat last night?
Oh, we went to the Break, I think is what it was called, just a sports bar here in Salt Lake. And yeah, it's me, Kellis, and Derek, right? Competition's all getting along, and this has been fun. I obviously it beats sitting in the hotel room alone. So we got a good group of K-State media traveling. We really do.
Yeah, it's fun. Gills, I've got a good feeling about tonight. I don't know what it is. I feel like this team discovered who it was, and I don't believe that what we saw on Saturday was them forgetting it and, kind of getting away from their style. I just didn't think they had enough in the tank to run their style, to get up and down. They got beat on rebounds, and it all just kind of snowballed on them. And Coleman Hawkins has got to be better. You just wrote about it at GoPowercat. Coleman Hawkins has to elevate his game again.
Yeah, and I know Jerome Tang kind of shied away from commenting maybe on Hawkins' struggles, saying that everybody needs to be better, right? And he thought Coleman played okay, but one can't deny, right? Like Doug McDaniel mentioned, that he needs Coleman to kind of go out and be that dude, right? Be unselfish, which Coleman Hawkins has a great trait, a great characteristic about him, that he's looking to set up his teammates. But we saw it, guys, when K-State was winning, it was when Coleman Hawkins was looking for himself, creating for himself. And then once you start scoring, right, then guys are, you're going to get double teamed. Guys are going to be open. Then you can pass it, right? So Coleman Hawkins just needs to maybe go back to his old assertive ways like we saw over the last number of weeks. And, he's scored, I think he's 4 of his last 20 from the field, only 6 points in each of the last 2 games. Coleman Hawkins is, maybe is his energy and buy-in and effort, like, has that been top-notch? That's probably up for debate. I think you can make an argument both ways, but bottom line, offensively, his production has not been there. No. And guys, we're beating a dead horse here talking about Doug and Coleman. This team will go as far as those two can take them. I wrote about this. I don't care if Brendan Hosling goes 0 from 3-point range, right? You can win a game with an off night from him. You can win games with off nights from certain players. It is very difficult for K-State to win unless Coleman and Doug are both playing at a high level, right? Was Doug perfect on Saturday? No, but he was up, above 20 points. And, without Doug McDaniel, K-State gets absolutely blown out in that game, right? So McDaniel's been playing. Maybe he hasn't necessarily missed a beat or missed a step. Coleman's definitely taken a step back as of late. And, I'm not trying to call out Coleman Hawkins. I'm sure he would admit that he needs to be better too.
And 2, you look at this matchup and watching Utah guys, they are a completely different team than BYU, right? Like what BYU wanted to do is they wanted to shoot a bunch of threes, get offensive rebounds. And I was talking to somebody about it. It's like they were playing bully ball. Like we remember the old West Virginia teams. This is the second time we brought this up. But Fitz, just as well as anybody, that's what they wanted to do. They would foul the ever-loving crap out of you. And if they didn't call it, then they would keep doing it. And that's what BYU did on Saturday. And credit to them because it worked. That's not the kind of team that Utah is. And K-State under Jerome Tang, even when they had the Elite 8 team, they've always struggled with that because they've never had a true post. Well, BYU had a few of those guys. Now, you look at what Utah brings to the table, and sure, they have I guess if you want to call it a true post, Lawson Lovering, he's 7'1", 230 pounds. I don't think that he's going to be the same type of player that BYU rolled out of there. But really, when you look at this matchup, and Ryan, you talked about this on GoPowercat as well, it's how can they stop Gabe Madsen? I mean, that is the guy for Utah. And you look at his stats from Saturday, and he just ran around the court and chucked up 1 million shots, and some of them went in. More went in than didn't go in, and it helped KU. It helped them beat KU. But if they can shut down Madsen, I really like K-State's chances in this game because Utah doesn't have a lot of scoring options. And I know you can say the same thing about K-State, but I feel like the depth is going to be there just a little bit more for K-State in this game.
Yeah, Madsen, I'd have to
Ryan Gilbert.
Real quick. Madsen has shot like 30-something threes over the last 2 games. Like, let him shoot, or not let him shoot. Force him into bad shots. Make him take bad shots, right? Because that Utah team has proven, right? There's been games and throughout Big 12 play where he's shooting like 11, 12 3-pointers a game, right? So I think the same thing could be said for Brendan Hosling. If you force him into like taking 15 not great shots, your team doesn't have a great chance of winning. Defensively, Kansas State can win this game by kind of forcing this Utah team into maybe taking some uncharacteristic or tough shots, right? I think Utah's proven that it might fall into that, right? K-State's probably more disciplined to know, right, that if it's not getting good looks, it's not going to take those. But with Utah, play good defense, force them to shoot it. I think they can fluster them a little bit, get them to take some bad shots, and that's another kind of key recipe to winning this game.
Gills, you always do a prediction on the site. It's behind the paywall for VIP customers. It kind of breaks down the game, your final piece breakdown, and then you give a score. You thought they'd lose at BYU. What are your feelings on the Utah game?
I feel good about this one. Like I said, are you wanting me to give the
score?
No,
Those magic numbers belong to our VIPs.
Right. You can get 30% off right now on GoPowercat, correct, Fitz? I mean, you got to sign up there.
I don't even know right now.
Yeah, you can stop watching me and us. That's better than this. But yeah, I said I liked Kansas State's chances for kind of all the reasons that we've just talked about for the last 10, 15 minutes, right? And the road doesn't necessarily scare me as much as it might. And this is just a K-State team that they treat every game like it's its own season. But this one, I'm sure they know that they have to have. I'd be very surprised if the energy level is not at a season high, right? Their effort level at Kansas State needs this one. If you don't get this one, guys, we've outlined it, right? You're not toast, but you've got a very steep uphill battle. So
you've already put the butter on. You're not toast, but you're not toast, but you've already put the butter on.
Right. I like that. That's a good, that's pretty good. Yeah. So yeah, I like Kansas State here. And I picked Arizona to win. I picked BYU to win. So I'm not just picking K-State with, every game here. I've got, speaking of the message boards, right? People may not be super happy with me when I pick against Kansas State, but I'm doing my job predicting the game how I see it.
That's Ryan Gilbert from a hotel room in Salt Lake City. Just beautiful artwork.
It's a Marriott. It's not a Hilton, Fitz. I know you can't believe that.
I feel pressured by our friends. Kellis made a reservation, so I just put you at the same hotel so he can be in charge of you. You need supervision, Gilbert. You need supervision. Thank you for joining us, Ryan Gilbert.
Thank you, guys.
Have you been banned by any other social media today?
As far as I know, it's funny. I was telling them last night, I wake up in the morning, text messages, go on the message boards, do my thing, and then I type a appeal to Twitter or X, right? It's just part of my routine every day. I just type in an appeal and hope that I get a response back, and we have not been successful yet.
You're like a prisoner trying to overturn your conviction.
But he was never told exactly when the crime happened, where it happened. He was told what the crime was, but nothing fits the crime. It's crazy. And I don't know. I don't know. I wish they'd just reply to you and say, no, we don't like you. Go away. Just get it over with, man.
The Fitz response.
Yeah, I don't like you. Okay, go cover victory, Ryan Gilbert. Get some more rest. You got a lot of travel tomorrow. Have fun landing in Manhattan when it's 0 degrees.
Hopefully my plane doesn't end up upside down.
That's bad, by the way. They're not designed to do that. Yeah. Okay, I'm kicking you out now. See you, brother.
See you guys.
He's a mess. He's just a mess. Let's wrap this up with a recap. The women lose 70-57 at West Virginia. Cole, it was pretty cool that game was on national TV. Yeah. Not ESPN either. Fox. It was on a network. So West Virginia put on a good show. They looked really good today. You weren't going to beat them on that day. As you said, they were at home. They were happy. And the crowd and them got after it. And K-State loses. But they expect Aoka Lee back for next Saturday's game with Kansas.
And I think it's a huge game. I think it's a giant game. This is a game where it's going to be there's going to be so many emotions that are going to be in that arena for, I'll just go out and say it. I don't think this will be Aoka Lee's last game in Bramlage. I'd be shocked if K-State doesn't, get a top 16 seed, but it's very possible. So there's going to be a lot of emotions that are in that arena, but, finding a way to put all that aside and take care of business against a KU team who, let's be honest, they're not very good. If you can take care of that KU team in the process of getting Lee back acclimated before they go to Baylor and Iowa State, two of the better teams, at least upper half teams in the league, it's going to be a very important game. We talk about a get-right game. That is a get-right game for K-State on Sunday. and flushing this game, getting back home, which again, we talk about getting back home. I hope that they're on the plane now, because that might be an interesting travel dilemma that they have to face. It's not easy to get to Morgantown, so getting back from Morgantown might be even more interesting, but getting back home and kind of refocusing and getting ready to take care of business on Sunday is paramount for the ladies.
Okay. And Luke Wells has been hired as Kansas State's tight end coach, the younger brother of offensive coordinator Matt Wells, associate head coach. Yes, a safe hire, a proven tight ends coach, someone who knows a lot of members on the staff, who's been here visiting, has coached in the Big 12 at a couple schools, and also coached at Oklahoma before they departed. So I just think this is a really solid hire.
It's his fourth Big 12 school that he's coached at. That's pretty impressive. And I think the recruiting ties in Oklahoma are going to really help K-State. An interesting note here, Fitz, that we haven't talked about, but you look at the official visits that K-State set up. I want to say they've set up 6 or 7. All of them, except for one, have either been in Texas or Oklahoma. The only outlier to that, 2. The only outlier to that, there's one in Illinois and there's one in Missouri. No Kansas kids, and I believe 5 Texas and Oklahoma kids that have scheduled official visits. And I don't think that having Wells rather will definitely help with that connection.
I would agree. As we talked about before we got on the air, they need to figure out who's going to be recruiting Nebraska. K-State's had a lot of success in Nebraska and Iowa, and Connor Riley did a lot of that. I'm sure they will not ignore that. I imagine Chris Kleiman will make sure the great northern states are covered properly because it's his homeland. And of course, K-State plays at Utah, the men, at 8 p.m. That game will be on ESPN2. I feel good about it. Ryan Gilbert feels good about K-State winning at Utah. Utah coming off a huge win over Kansas. And, of course, K-State lost to BYU on Saturday. How do you feel about this game?
I feel very good about it, too, which is probably a bad thing for all the K-State fans that all 3 of us agree, because typically that doesn't happen. For everything I said earlier, I think it has more to do with Utah than it does K-State, right? Like I look at this game and I think Utah, you look at what just happened with Utah, the fact that they're overachieved against Kansas, the fact that they're not going on the road, they're actually staying at home, I think hurts them in this situation, because when you go on the road, you tend to have a little bit more focus. They're staying at home, and they have a team where if you just look at them on paper, you say, oh, well, they just lost to BYU and we beat BYU. Look at their record overall. They're not very good. I'm not saying that they're going to overlook K-State, but this is a perfect get-right opportunity. And dude walking in the background, I think, agrees with everything that I'm saying. He even has his purple on. Which is
I guess the podcast is over because dude has awakened from his nap, and he's now part of the studio. I'm looking forward to this game. I've got a good feeling about it, and I think this is a huge game for K-State. This is an enormous game. Again, we think they can only afford to lose one more before Kansas City. They've got 6 games. 3 of those games are on the road. And if you look at it, to be really safe, because Iowa State's by far the best team they have left on the schedule, to be safe, you got 3 road games you got to win. You got this one. Then coming up, you will have a UCF and a Cincinnati trip. And in between there, you got a couple games at home, starting with Arizona State on Sunday. You got to win. They can't mess around here, buddy. They got to get to work, and get to work starting tonight.
Yep, it's a huge game. ESPN2, 8 o'clock. There's really no other good games on. I think Arizona and Baylor play at 9, so you get done watching this. If you're a parent in the Kansas City area, I would expect school to be called off very soon if it hasn't already since we've been recording. But snuggle up with your blanket and watch some K-State hoops.
May I recommend you get a couple of giant poodles for the cold weather days? They're kind of handy. They're a little bit smelly right now. They're kind of like Ryan Gilbert. That's it for this edition of GPC Live, the first one in I don't know how many years.
Wow.
We usually just do the Insiders Live, or we do a live podcast. I just thought I'd get fancy today, and look what we ended up with. What a glorious thing. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We got up to almost 500 here on a spontaneous live. That's kind of fun. Cats, Utes, 8 p.m., Salt Lake City. It's on ESPN2. Enjoy. I think the Cats are going to get this one. But what do I know? I've been wrong about them a lot this season.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.